So, hi, everybody. This is the SAP Mobile Advisor Podcast. My name is Damian Peterson. I'm here with Steve Green from Havensight Consulting Group, where we discuss lightheartedly SAP mobile challenges in the warehouse, storeroom, or distribution center. And today's podcast topic is a deeper conversation around a recent blog titled Six Key Reasons Not to Use ITS Mobile. And the goal of today's conversation is to lend a deeper understanding of the challenges around the SAP ITS mobile app and the expected business benefits that our customers tend to expect from their mobile usage in those use cases. We brought a guest today, Scott Schutz, Director of Consulting here at Havensight. Scott, if you don't mind, give a little bit about your background and experience.
Okay, hey everybody. My name's Scott Schutz, and one of the directors here at Havensight. What I do is primarily work on project delivery. So I'm one of the leaders of projects as we work with our customers and bring solutions out to the market and work with our internal teams here to manage their execution. I also work with our sales team and do some solutioning and project plan creation and proposal creation and try and make sure we've got the right fit and the right plan to execute on. And prior to Havensight, I worked in a warehouse management software vendor company for quite a few years and did many projects implementing that WMS software in all kinds of different distribution and storage facilities.
Well, Scott, thanks for joining us here today. So the blog, the six key reasons not to use ITS mobile, addresses those specific reasons. And just for a quick summary, for those of you who may not have read the blog itself, we talk about security vulnerabilities. Number one, number two, poor connection handling. So the challenges if you lose a connection or you need offline requirements. Then we get into like a UX experience, right? So poor ease of use, the complex and cluttered screen layouts, slow app response times, and lack of hardware support as the six key reasons not to use ITS Mobile. So let's start with security vulnerabilities. I'll open it to either one of you, right? And what are your thoughts on those kind of challenges that SAP customers face there?
Well, I'll start on that one, Damien. So I think it's something that's really hitting the marketplace right now. It's not something that was a problem early on. So when console and ITS Mobile actually made its way into the mobile scene years ago, but it's something that has become a problem over time, right? As hackers and people like that get more sophisticated, the technology needs to keep up, and the console and ITS mobile solutions really have not. And I kind of go back to one of our customers, a global gaming company. Um, they had a board which was doing a security audit of all their systems. So they looked at all their back office systems, they looked at all their mobile technology, and what they found was that there was a gaping hole, and the hole was in the warehouse. It was with ITS Mobile. And the board came back to the business and IT and said, not please get this fixed, kind of said, you will get this fixed in the next 6 months. Or people are gonna be in some pretty big trouble because it was a huge problem for them, especially in the industry they're in. So, and that's a company that obviously spent the time, effort, and money to go out and figure it out. But if you're running ITS Mobile, you haven't gone through that process. There's a pretty good chance you're in a similar position, and you need to get it solved, pretty quickly, or you're exposed.
Yeah, and I think that just happens with older technologies over time, right? Security standards change and vulnerabilities, come up, and if that software is not being maintained and patched and keeping up with the latest and greatest, pretty much most uh, software that's internet exposed in any way, right? It's going to have some vulnerabilities.
So, what do customers expect, Scott? Like, what do you think they expect in that spot?
I think they expect that the infrastructure that their solution is built on is going to be maintained, and that any new, security patches that are needed are provided, holes are plugged, right? As because that's just a nonstop process that all software needs to have active management, on any security issues that come up.
So, when we talk about security vulnerabilities, oftentimes I hear words like terminal emulation and telnet servers. Like, what are those, and why does that matter?
Well, again, those are just older technologies, right? I can't speak to any specific vulnerabilities that any of those might have, but just being the age they are, they are susceptible.
Got it. Got it. So probably don't need to use terminal emulation anymore these days, though. Is that fair?
People do, right? Because solutions, once they're in place, sometimes slow to migrate to newer technologies. But there are definitely better solutions, right, out there
All right.
than terminal emulation right now.
So the next topic is poor connection handling. Again, I'll leave it to either one of you. Like, what do we mean by poor connection handling? What do you mean by that?
Well, so Scott and I have been doing this for quite quite a few years. I think we probably both dove into this industry back in the 1990s when it really was kind of at its infancy. They were still working with UHF, was the RF technology at the time, um, and it's been a struggle um, from the time that it started to today, and it continues on today, where your RF network, you set it up just like your home network, right? Sometimes you've got perfect coverage throughout your entire house. Other times, for whatever reason, you lose a connection and you can't, nothing's changed. You haven't modified the access point, you haven't changed where it's at, but you lose connection. And that's just the nature of wireless technology. As good as it's become, and as widespread as the coverage can be in these warehouses, um, sometimes there's a blip in in the hardware. Maybe there's some kind of interference within the building for a moment or two that could impact a connection to somebody that's on a forklift or walking around the warehouse. um, so it's just the nature of the technology. Frankly, it's a nature of what you have to deal with the applications, with the mobile applications, especially ones that are enterprise level, where the data that's being collected and sent to the back end it's important that you don't lose it, misplace it, lose connection in the middle of transmission. Um, that's kind of what we're talking about, Damien. It's inevitable, I think. I don't know if Scott would have a different explanation, but you can't avoid it. It's going to happen at some point or another, and it's how do you have a system in place that can address it?
And for whatever reason, ITS Mobile has been kind of notorious for not responding well to a loss in connectivity. So um, eh, I think part of that has to do with just the stateless nature of the solution as it exists, right? Is you're not keeping the state of the transaction outside of that connection, and if you lose that connection, then what users would report is, I lost my transaction. I went all the way back to the menu and had to start over again. And so there have been lots of tools, add-ons, patches, third-party stuff to try and address that. Um, and I think those things have helped, all right, over time, to add some other software layer that might do some caching or something like that to try and maintain a stable connection. But it really shouldn't be necessary, right? Your core solution should be able to handle that scenario, right, without losing productivity by having someone have to go back on their transactions, do them again.
Yeah, and I want to pile onto that for a minute, Damien, because I think it's important. What Scott just said is super important. So we talked in the previous item, right? The whole security component, terminal emulation, right? And there were other software components that were related to that solution. When you get to this point, so now you've got TE, uh, maybe you have to throw in a third party piece of software to do caching. Not only do you have a more complex solution in place, now you don't know what's causing the problems, right? Between the different packages. Is it the core ITS mobile app? Is it the TE client? Is it this caching client that you may have to have in place to deal with offline scenarios or blips in coverage, things like that. Um, so you've got that thing. How do you troubleshoot it, and who's going to support all those different connections? But do you theoretically have additional holes in your security protocols when you bring third parties in? That's another place to attack. If you're somebody that's really interested in getting into somebody's network, into their corporate network. So it just makes it complicated. And I agree with Scott. I mean, if you can have a solution, if you can use a native tool that allows you to deal with a direct connection and these offline scenarios, it's easier to support. But more importantly, it's easier to make sure you're maintaining your security umbrella over the corporation.
Yeah, I read a study recently of 250 warehouses. It's a survey, excuse me, and interesting statistics out of that was they said 84% of the workers experience at least one drop session per shift.
Yeah.
And some other interesting facts is like the warehouse workers spend on average about 4 hours a day on these handheld devices. They said 65% of the workers said it takes between 10 and 30 minutes to resolve a dropped session. So, um, from a productivity standpoint, right, offline can be very costly, create a lot of some serious inefficiencies. And I think if you put dollars to it, like they did in this survey, they said that, essentially equates to roughly $29.23 per worker per day per impact. So you kind of scale that out over 50 workers. That can,
Mhm.
times 250 business days a year, it starts to add up. So
Yeah, and you're talking about the blip scenario where you lose coverage, and like Scott kind of outlined, you've got to go reconstruct, redo all the transactions you had done previously, and hopefully you remember everything, right? And you didn't forget about a put away or forget about a pick, and you've now sent material out the door without a record of sending it. So, yeah, you really need a solution that addresses that automatically so that you don't have to think about it. You can keep working offline if necessary.
Yeah, yep. And related back to the security thing, right? Like you said, the fewer like third-party components and other solutions that you have as part of the better, right? Because this year we saw, was it the SolarWinds, a, failure that was just a component that was part of a whole bunch of different software
Right.
products that when it had a hole, right, it affected many industries, many businesses, and so just limiting your exposure to extra tools that aren't needed, right, is always beneficial.
next topic we have is poor ease of use. I'm going to combine that with number 4 on our list, which is complex and cluttered screen layouts. Um, I think from Havensight's point of view, right, we believe it's essential to put the mobile experiences of your connected frontline worker first. But before we start looking at the way we look at things, how about the questions for you guys is from an ITS mobile perspective, like what makes the UX, so challenging over there?
Scott, you want to take this one first?
Sure.
I don't want to
Yeah, I
hog
mean,
all the
this
airtime
one's kind
here.
of that's kind of a
Yeah.
softball, right? Because if you just look at the applications, you can see what the challenge is in hitting function keys and filling out fields where you don't have enough room to type the data, Just the kind of the legacy UI is just a little clunky, and everyone has a cell phone in their pocket that has a user experience that's 10 times improved on that, for all the different apps they have. So the a modern UI that um, you know capitalizes on the experience that the people already have with their own devices, and what they do in their day-to-day lives just makes sense, right?
Yeah, and Damien, it looks like you pulled up a screenshot of some of the older technologies. So I think Scott's exactly right. And if you look at the top two lines, the black screen and the middle blue screen, those are SAP console on top, ITS mobile in the middle. And you can see they're very function key driven. So um, not only do you have to use function keys, so you're constantly touching the screen or touching the small keyboard that's on some of these ruggedized mobile devices. But you also kind of need to know the transaction codes inside of the SAP backend as well. Um, and if you think about the workforce that we're transitioning through right now, there's a lot of folks leaving the workforce. They're retiring probably at a record pace, on a day by day and a week by week basis. When they leave, there a lot of that knowledge on what transaction codes we're running in the warehouse kind of walk out the door, and what you're left with is a bunch of new workers. Generally, companies don't have significant amounts of training material where they can get somebody up to speed quickly. So they bring people in and they have to figure this out on the fly, and that doesn't always go well, right? The change management is pretty significant in these cases. So and we're not even talking yet about what happens when you move it from a small screen like what you're showing here. This is really kind of a handheld motif that you've got on the screen. But if you're talking about like a truck mount or a tablet, which is pretty common on forklifts, and people that are doing jobs with high lifts and things, the same screen, kind of in the same shape, shows up on the giant screen of those. And what happens there is you get into resolution issues. Either the fields are so tiny on the screen that you can barely see them, or they're just so big and ridiculous, almost cartoonish, that it makes it almost impossible to use. So there's all kinds of challenges with this because it's not a modern interface, right? It doesn't automatically adjust to the size of the screen and put in, maybe a menu comes to the right side of the screen when you're on the truck mount size screen, but on the handheld, it's a single screen and you have to push a button to get to the menu. So, but the application automatically knows what kind of device it's on and it makes the adjustments automatically for the user. And that bottom line you've got on the screen, our application actually uses less screens because we don't have to move through function keys and to get to different menus and different workflows. The workflows are kind of baked into the application, and they're intuitive, so the user can really figure out, oh, I want to do receiving. I open the receiving application, and the receiving application walks them through what they need to do. There's a very obvious path through the application. So that's kind of what we mean by clunky, and how do you improve that? It's going with modern technology to address those issues.
Yeah, and from a screen layout perspective, and all the user controls that are on a particular application page, using a more modern technology just opens it up to a lot of different options, such as, rather than have to go to a new screen every time, you might pop up a modal dialog that just allows entry of a couple things, and then you just kind of stay on the same screen you were and don't go down a hierarchy. That's, I think one of the complaints that users of kind of traditional SAP mobile technologies have had is, I'm just constantly hitting buttons to go to the next, to the next, to the next, and back, back, back. And it's a very like deep structure just to get to a simple process. And you can flatten that out a lot and make it just a lot more intuitive and easy to use.
So, Steve, what are your thoughts? Like, how important is the UX. When you've got a mobile deployment that you're rolling out to a factory, a warehouse, maybe 30 warehouses, maybe for 30 users, maybe for 500 users. When you think about the UX, like how important is that? I mean, is it all that matters is that the transactions are there and you should be able to do them, or is the UX like is that a top one, two, or three decision criteria for customers oftentimes, or is it farther down on the list?
Yeah, I think most people we talk to, for the reason Scott brought up a couple minutes ago, everybody's got a phone in their pocket today, right? Everybody, right? Um, from the people in the top offices in a company, all the way through the people that are doing warehouse transactions. Everybody's got a phone, and they're used to easy to use apps. That's just the expectation when you pick up a mobile device, that whatever app you're going to use is going to be easy. And I think I can say universally, all of our customers come to us with, especially when they're moving from older technology, the user interface is the most important thing for us. And it's the most important thing because they have to go through change management. When they put a new solution in, it's got to be easy and intuitive for their users to pick up and leverage, in order to get their job done. And what's become actually probably more prevalent here in the last couple of years is, as the workforce transitions out on the upper end, you've got a new crop of people coming through the door, and their expectation is that they're going to have mobile apps to use that make sense, that don't look like DOS screens from the 1980s, and they can quickly pick the device up and get right to work. I mean, that is their expectation coming through the door. And it actually can be a recruiting tool, so that when people come through the door, you can kind of show them what you're doing, how it works, and it makes them feel like, I'm going to get this job. It'll make sense to me right away, and I can get right to work. I'm not going to have this long training plan that I'm going to have to go through to learn what these folks are doing in the warehouse. It's going to be pretty simple and easy to do.
Yeah. It can also depend a little bit on the mission of the site that you're implementing for. So, SAP has EWM, WM, and just plain inventory management, um, capabilities. And if you're on one of those high end, an EWM solution, and maybe you're running a distribution center with customer orders that have fulfillment dates and things that you're trying to meet, then every click counts, right? And so you want to be able to process as many transactions as fast as possible. If you're running an MRO warehouse in support of a maintenance operation, maybe it's not as big a concern, right, for you as a customer. But you still, having an efficient process is still, I think it's important for everyone. But there's kind of a scale there of how much benefit can you really get out of speedy transactions, not just the UI, but also integrating to SAP, and how fast is that?
So you talked about fast right there. So it's a good transition into our fifth item on the blog, which is slow app response times. And I was thinking about ITS Mobile that came out in 2007. That's the same year the iPhone debuted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So before we had the advent of today's modern tablets and RFID and all the things that go along with those things. But slow app response times. What causes that? What's the solution going forward?
Well, so some of the same tools that we talked about on the security side also, would um, and connection handling side would provide some improvements, some caching, and less data moving across the wire for improving the app response times. So it's really just something that's kind of built into the architecture of the ITS mobile solutions that um, you know that there's a lot of chatter back and forth constantly with the backend system, and that can be slow depending on the amount of data. And so some of these add-on solutions and third-party things were like, okay, let's cache some of that, bring some of it, locally into a server, and that kind of thing. So really complicating the architecture, just because the inherent um, lack of speed in the technologies. And a lot of that's been improved on with more current SAP integration technologies like gateway server and OData services.
Okay. And let's tackle the last one here. So um, lack of hardware support, right? So what we hear from complaints from customers, at least for me on the sales side, right, is I hear there's challenges with it rendering on the device or rendering on different types of devices, things like that. Can you unpack that a little bit more? Like, what do we mean lack of hardware support? And maybe you've got a customer story that you can share with that as well.
Yeah, so this one really ties into what I was talking about a couple minutes ago, actually, with rendering the application on a handheld device versus a truck mount device. We actually had a customer that went out, spent several $1 million on new hardware. So they went out, and what they were trying to do, Damien, is they were trying to take their roles and then give people in certain roles certain device types. So people that were doing forward picking, they were trying to give them hands-free like ring mount scanners where you have the scanner on your finger and then you've got a terminal on your wrist, um, because they needed to be hands-free, right? They were moving boxes, picking parts, and they didn't want to have to go to a terminal and type information in. So that was one use case. They had another use case, classic person walking around the warehouse doing counts and things like that. They had handheld terminals. And then they had a bunch of people on fork trucks and high lifts that had truck mount terminals, so bigger screens. And they wanted to be able to use their ITS mobile app across all those different device types. Um, they attempted, and they couldn't make it work. They surely couldn't make it work on the wrist mounts. The screen real estate was so small that they couldn't get enough function keys on the screen to actually be usable. So that was their first challenge. Next challenge, they had some rendering issues on the bigger devices versus the handhelds. So they basically took this couple $1 million in hardware, put it in a bin in their warehouse, and just let it sit and collect dust until they found us. We came in, we deployed a UI5 based template app, which we've built for the different modules that Scott mentioned, IM, WM, EWM. And what we did is basically replicated their business processes in that application. And because we've used modern mobile technology, it actually renders across all the device types. So it knows when it's on a wrist mount with a few line screen, and it changes so that it puts the right buttons in the right place at the right time based on where they're at in a transaction. It rendered appropriately on the handheld and took advantage of the full real estate on the truck mounts. Um, so it was a big deal for them because that hardware had been sitting on the shelf for a couple of years. And so basically, it was like $2 million in cash just sitting on the shelf doing nothing,
Wow,
providing
that's
no
great.
benefit to the customers. So, and frankly, that's not the only customer this has happened at. It's a pretty common occurrence. Um, there's some customers where their application is device dependent and the devices time out, so they can't buy them anymore. So they end up with an application that's device dependent, and every time a device breaks, they lose a user in the warehouse. So we've got all kinds of stories like that, but that's what we're talking about when we're talking device issues.
Scott, if we wrap up here, any anecdotes or experiences or final parting thoughts as it relates to challenges with ITS Mobile and or customer experiences with ITS Mobile?
Well, I would just say maybe not. This is more like a positive about the solution and technologies that we've chosen for our MIT application. It's built on the same foundation that Fiori applications are built on, with a big exception that is we built it as a mobile first type application. So it's rather than be designed for a full screen, it's designed for the handheld. But as Steve was saying, just how being able to render that application across multiple devices, it is responsive as well. So bring the same application to a browser, and it will take advantage of the additional real estate that you might have on your laptop or on a bigger tablet. And those are some of the advantages that some newer technologies like what we're using for our solution have over something like ITS, and certainly over something like SAP Console.
Awesome. Well, Scott Schutz, thank you for being our guest here today. And that wraps up this episode of the SAP Mobile Advisor series. And we're talking about the 6 key reasons not to use ITS Mobile as your platform. And Steve, I'll see you on the next podcast.
Okay, you bet. Thank you.
All right. Bye, guys.